There is a moment. You have lived it, though perhaps you have never named it, when you walk into a room and without a single word, without a single gesture, something in the air changes. Someone softens, someone straightens their spine, and someone else, standing quietly in the corner, feels a small, cold flicker of hatred they cannot explain, cannot justify, and would never confess, not even to themselves. That flicker is not about you. It was never about you. It is about everything in them that your light has touched without permission. Tonight, I do not want to comfort you. I want to show you something far more useful than comfort. I want to show you why. Sit with that for a moment. Because what I am about to say will not feel like encouragement in the way you are used to receiving it. It will feel, at first, like an accusation against the world. And then, if you let it work on you the way frost works on a window, slowly, from the edges inward, it will become something else entirely. It will become freedom. There is no heading over these words because what I have to say to you is not a lecture divided into parts. It is a single unbroken thought, the way a wound is a single unbroken thing, even though it has many causes. So let us begin where all honest things begin, not with the light, but with the darkness that the light disturbs. I have spent a great many years, more years than I care to count in front of an audience, studying the peculiar mathematics of the human soul. And if there is one law I have watched repeat itself with the certainty of a tide, it is this: what is unconscious in one person will always seek its reflection in another. The mind does not tolerate a vacuum. What a person refuses to look at within themselves does not disappear. It goes underground. It waits. And then, one day, it meets someone who is not afraid to look, someone who feels deeply, who forgives easily, who listens without flinching, who carries warmth the way other people carry grudges, and the buried thing inside the frightened person stirs. It recognizes in you everything it was told long ago to bury. This is the beginning of understanding why the empath, the one who feels too much, who senses too accurately, who cannot help but see, becomes, for certain people, not a comfort but a provocation. You were taught, I imagine, that kindness invites kindness, that sensitivity earns gentleness in return, that if you simply loved people well enough, listened long enough, gave generously enough, you would be safe from their cruelty. I want to tell you something that the softer voices in your life were too afraid to say. This is only half true, and the half that is missing is the half that has been breaking your heart for years. Kindness does invite kindness from those who have made some peace with their own darkness. But kindness offered to someone still at war with themselves does not soothe, it exposes. It is a mirror held up to a face that has spent a lifetime avoiding mirrors. Let me tell you what happens inside a person who has never made friends with their own shadow. that portion of the self containing everything they were shamed for, punished for, told to hide. A child does not arrive in this world ashamed. Shame is taught somewhere at some early and undefended age. That person learned that certain feelings were unacceptable, their sadness too much, their anger too dangerous, their tenderness too weak, their need too shameful. And so, brick by brick, a wall went up, not around the world, around the self. What could not be expressed was exiled into the unconscious, into that vast underground chamber. I have spent my whole working life mapping, and there it has remained, not dead, never dead, only sleeping, only waiting for a light bright enough to wake it. And then you arrive, you who feel without shame, you who cry at another person's grief as though it were your own, because in some sense it is. You who notice the tremor in someone's voice before they've finished their sentence. You who forgive too quickly, apologize too easily, give too freely, not because you are foolish, but because your nervous system has never built the wall that theirs was forced to build. And when you stand near such a person, your very presence becomes an unbearable question. Why can this person feel what I was never permitted to feel? That question does not arrive in their conscious mind as a question. It arrives as irritation, as a strange coldness toward someone who has done nothing wrong, as gossip they cannot quite explain the pleasure of, as a subtle campaign to diminish you, delivered with a smile, wrapped in the language of concern. You're too sensitive, you're too much, you need to toughen up. Words that are not observations about you at all, but confessions about them, spoken in a language they do not know they are speaking. I want you to understand something about resentment, because resentment is the least honest of all human emotions. Anger announces itself, grief weeps openly, fear trembles where it can be seen, but resentment hides. It disguises itself as humor, as advice, as concern for your well-being, as jokes made at your expense in front of others, as silence when you needed a word, as praise so faint it functions as an insult. Resentment is envy that has been forbidden from calling itself envy, and so it must find another name, another shape, another exit from the body that carries it. And the target it chooses, almost without exception, is whoever reminds the resentful person of the very thing they have exiled in themselves. You are not being punished for a flaw. You are being punished for a mirror. And there is a profound difference between the two, though I understand why. In the moment, they feel identical. Consider this: a person who has made peace with their own capacity for love does not feel threatened by witnessing love in someone else. A person who has forgiven themselves for their own softness does not feel enraged by softness in another. It is only the person still at war with a disowned part of themselves who experiences another's wholeness as an accusation. Your light is not aggressive. It has never once attacked anyone. But light, by its very nature, reveals what darkness prefers to conceal, and the revealing itself feels, to the concealed thing, like an act of violence, even though nothing violent has occurred. This is the first great truth I want to leave inside you tonight. You are not too much. You are simply undisguised. And undisguised people have always unsettled a world built on disguises. Now I know what some of you are thinking, because I have sat across from thousands of people carrying this exact wound, and their thoughts, however different their circumstances, echo one another with remarkable precision. You are thinking, then should I dim myself? Should I become smaller, quieter, less feeling, so that I stop provoking what I do not intend to provoke? Listen to me carefully, because this is the exact point at which so many gentle souls take a wrong turn and spend decades wandering a path that leads only to their own erasure. No, the answer is no, and it will always be no, and anyone who tells you otherwise is asking you to perform a kind of quiet suicide, not of the body, but of the very faculty that makes you who you are. Dimming your light does not heal the resentful person. It only removes the mirror from in front of them, so that they can go on avoiding themselves a little longer, at your expense. You would be sacrificing your own wholeness so that another person's unconsciousness could remain comfortable. That is not compassion. That is self-betrayal, dressed in the language of humility, and I have watched it hollow out extraordinary people until there was almost nothing left of them but an apology shaped like a human being. The task before you is not to become smaller. The task before you is to become so thoroughly, unapologetically integrated, so at peace with your own shadow, your own contradictions, your own capacity for both love and rage, both light and darkness, that no one's projection can find purchase on you anymore. This is not the same as becoming hard. Hardness is simply another disguise, another wall, another exile of feeling. What I am describing is something rarer, a softness that has grown roots, a sensitivity that has learned to stand. Let us go deeper, because there is a piece of this puzzle that almost no one speaks of, and it concerns not the resentful person, but you. Why do you, again and again, find yourself standing near people who cannot tolerate your light? Why does this pattern repeat? Different faces, different rooms, different years, the same underlying wound. I will tell you, and I ask you to receive this not as blame, but as the beginning of your liberation. The unconscious does not only exist in the person who resents you, it exists in you as well. And there is very often, inside the empath, inside the healer, inside the one who gives and gives and gives, an old, buried belief, planted perhaps in childhood, perhaps by a parent who could only be reached through service, perhaps by an early wound that whispered, "You are only safe, only worthy, only lovable when you are useful to someone else's pain." And this belief, operating far below the level of conscious thought, draws you, like a compass drawn to its pole, toward precisely the people who need the most saving and can offer the least in return. You do not choose these people with your mind. You are pulled toward them by an old unmet need dressed up as compassion. This is not a flaw in your character. It is a wound in your history, and wounds left unexamined do not stay in the past. They organize the future. They select, from every room you ever walk into, the very people most likely to wound you again, because some exiled part of you believes that if you can finally heal this person, you will finally prove that you were always worth loving. I want you to hear this clearly. You cannot love someone into loving their own reflection. You cannot give someone enough warmth to melt a coldness they have spent a lifetime protecting. That work is theirs. It was always theirs. And the sooner you release yourself from the secret, unspoken contract you signed somewhere in your childhood, the contract that says, my worth is measured by how much of other people's darkness I can absorb, the sooner your light will stop attracting the very people who resent it, because you will no longer be offering it as a sacrifice. You will simply be living it, the way a fire simply burns, without needing anyone's permission to be warm. There is an old alchemical image I have returned to many times across my years of work. The image of gold buried in filth. The alchemists believed that the most precious substance in existence was not found gleaming on the surface of the world, but hidden in the basest, most unpromising material, and that the entire labor of transformation consisted of learning to see the gold within the mud rather than searching for gold somewhere untouched by mud altogether. I want you to hold that image gently because it applies to you in two directions at once. First, you, the empath, the sensitive one, the one who feels the suffering of the world as though it were pressing directly against your own skin. You are, in some sense, gold that has not yet fully separated itself from mud. Your gift is real. It is not an illusion, not a fiction. You tell yourself to feel special. But it has not yet been refined by fire, and until it is, it remains vulnerable to being buried again by the very darkness it was meant to illuminate. The refining fire is not punishment. It is the process by which your compassion learns discernment, by which your softness learns boundaries, by which your light learns that it does not have to shine into every room that asks it to, especially not the rooms built specifically to extinguish it. And second, the resentful person, the one who cannot tolerate your radiance, the one whose small cruelties have left marks on you that you still carry, that person too is gold buried in mud. Their resentment is not their essence. It is the crust that formed over a wound, so old they can no longer remember its origin. This does not mean you owe them your presence, your patience, or your continued suffering. It does not mean you are required to stand still while someone works out, at your expense, a grief that predates you entirely. but it means that hatred is never the final word on a human being. It is only ever the first, most desperate defense of a heart that has forgotten it is allowed to be whole. Here is where I must speak to you plainly, because too many teachers, standing where I stand tonight, would stop at compassion and leave you there, disarmed, still bleeding, still available to be wounded again in the name of understanding. I will not do that to you. Understanding why someone resents your light does not obligate you to keep standing in front of them while they throw stones at it. This is crucial, and I want it to lodge itself somewhere permanent in you, past the reach of your natural instinct to forgive too quickly. Insight into another person's wound is not the same as an invitation for that wound to keep injuring you. You can hold enormous compassion for what made someone cruel, and still, in the very same breath, remove yourself entirely from their reach. These two things are not in conflict. In fact, they are the very definition of maturity, the capacity to see clearly and to act decisively rather than collapsing, as so many gentle people do, into either cold judgment on one side or boundaryless self-sacrifice on the other. You are allowed to walk away from someone whose unconscious keeps mistaking your kindness for an enemy. You are allowed to stop explaining yourself to people who have already decided, long before you arrived, that your softness is a weakness to be exploited rather than a gift to be respected. You are allowed to grieve a friendship, a family relationship, even a love that could not survive contact with your own becoming, because I promise you, some relationships are built entirely on your smallness, and they will not survive your growth, and that is not a tragedy. That is evidence that you have finally begun to outgrow a container that was never large enough to hold the whole of you in the first place. Let me speak now about the particular loneliness of this path, because I do not wish to romanticize it. There is a specific grief that belongs only to those who feel deeply in a world that has not yet learned what to do with depth. You will, at times, feel unbearably alone, not because no one loves you, but because so few people can meet you at the depth you naturally inhabit. You will find yourself simplifying your own perceptions in conversation, editing your own insight down to something smaller and more palatable, because you have learned through painful experience that the full weight of your seeing makes certain people uncomfortable. And every time you do this, every time you shrink your perception to protect someone else's comfort, a small part of you goes quiet. Do this too many times over too many years, and you may wake one day and no longer recognize the muted, careful voice that has replaced the one you were born with. I do not tell you this to frighten you. I tell you this because naming a danger is the first act of defense against it. The world will not warn you about this particular erosion because the world, on the whole, prefers you a little dimmer, a little quieter, a little more manageable. It is not usually cruelty that dims an empath. It is 1,000 small accommodations, made with good intentions, across so many years that they eventually add up to a kind of disappearance. So let this be, if nothing else survives of tonight, the sentence you carry home with you. Accommodating someone's discomfort with your depth is not kindness, it is abandonment of yourself by yourself. Now I want to turn towards something more hopeful, because darkness, however honestly named, is never the whole of the story, and I would be doing you a disservice if I left you standing only inside the wound. There is a reason your particular kind of sensitivity has survived. Generation after generation, culture after culture, despite every force that has tried to shame it out of existence, it survives because it is necessary. The world does not merely need people who can build and conquer and accumulate. It needs people who can feel the invisible costs of building and conquering and accumulating, who can sense the grief beneath a stranger's forced smile, who can notice the child in the corner of the room that no one else has thought to check on, who can hold space for suffering that has nowhere else to go. This is not a small function. This is one of the oldest and most sacred functions a human being can serve, and it has never, in the long history of our species, been unnecessary. Every resentful glance you have ever received, every subtle cruelty dressed as concern, every friend who quietly punished you for feeling too much, none of it has managed to extinguish what you carry. That alone should tell you something about its strength. A flame that provokes envy is not a weak flame. Nothing invisible, nothing negligible, nothing small has ever been resented by anyone. Resentment is, in its own twisted way, a form of recognition. It is the involuntary confession that something real and undeniable stands in front of the resentful person, something they cannot dismiss, however much they might wish to. Let that reframe something in you tonight. The people who could not tolerate your light were not responding to your weakness. They were responding, however unconsciously, to your unmistakable strength. I want to speak now about the work that remains, because insight without practice is merely a beautiful thought that changes nothing, and I did not come here tonight to leave you with beautiful thoughts alone. The first task is this: make peace with your own shadow before you go, looking for peace in anyone else's. You cannot recognize another person's unconscious resentment clearly if you yourself are still unconsciously performing goodness in order to avoid your own darker feelings. Yes, you too carry rage. You too carry envy, pettiness, exhaustion with other people's suffering, moments of wanting to be selfish, wanting to be first, wanting simply to be left alone. These are not failures of your empathy. They are evidence of your full humanity. An empath who has exiled their own shadow in the name of being endlessly good becomes paradoxically more vulnerable to other people's projections, not less. because an unclaimed darkness in you will always resonate quietly with the unclaimed darkness in someone else, and resonance, whether we like it or not, is how these old wounds find each other across a crowded room. Own your shadow, not to indulge it, not to excuse cruelty in yourself, but to know it intimately enough that no one can use it against you, and intimately enough that you no longer need anyone else's approval to feel whole. A person who has genuinely met their own darkness cannot be as easily wounded by someone else's, because they have already survived the more difficult confrontation, the one that happens in private, in the mirror, at 3 in the morning, when there is no audience left to perform goodness for. The second task is discernment, and this is where so many kind people fail, not from lack of wisdom, but from an old habit of giving indiscriminately, as though love were a resource without limits, as though every person who asks for your light has earned the right to receive it. They have not. Discernment does not mean becoming suspicious of everyone. It means learning, slowly and with practice, to distinguish between someone who is struggling and reaching toward the light and someone who is comfortable in their darkness and merely wants to pull you down into it with them. The first person will meet your compassion with gratitude, however imperfectly, however slowly. The second person will meet your compassion with entitlement, with escalating demands, with a subtle but unmistakable resentment. When you finally, exhausted, have nothing left to give, learn to feel the difference in your body before your mind has even finished analyzing it. Your body has always known. It is your mind, trained since childhood to override your own instincts in favor of being agreeable, that has kept you standing in rooms your body warned you to leave. Trust that early flicker of unease the next time it arrives. Do not talk yourself out of it in the name of giving someone the benefit of the doubt. You can extend compassion to a person's wound without extending your presence to their ongoing behavior. These are two entirely separate acts, and confusing them is precisely what has cost you, across the years, more than you have ever allowed yourself to add up. The third task, and perhaps the most difficult, is this: you must stop apologizing for your own depth. I have watched countless people, brilliant, feeling, perceptive people, spend entire decades of their lives making themselves smaller in rooms that were never built to hold them in the first place. All because somewhere someone taught them that their intensity was a burden rather than a gift. I want you to notice, starting tonight, every single time you begin a sentence with an apology for how deeply you feel something. Sorry, I know this is a lot. Sorry, I overthink things. Sorry, I'm too sensitive. Every one of these small apologies is a tiny surrender, a tiny vote cast against your own nature, and cast often enough, these votes accumulate into a life spent shrinking. Your depth is not a defect requiring apology. It is the very instrument through which you perceive what others miss entirely. Would you ask an eagle to apologize for seeing farther than the sparrow? Would you ask the deepest well to apologize for holding more water than the shallow one? No. And yet you have been asking yourself for years perhaps to apologize for holding more feeling, more perception, more compassion than the average nervous system was built to carry. Stop. Let the apology end here, tonight, in this room, in this moment. You do not owe the world a smaller version of your own soul. I want to return, before I close, to the resentful person, because I do not want you to leave here tonight with hatred in your heart for those who have hurt you, even though your hurt is entirely legitimate. Hatred, held too long, becomes its own kind of prison, and I would not wish that prison on you, of all people, the ones who feel so deeply that even your enemies deserve, eventually, a kind of understanding, even if they never deserve your continued presence. Every person who has resented your light was, once, a child who was told, in some form, that their own light was too much, that their crying was inconvenient, that their needs were burdensome, that their joy was too loud, their anger too frightening, their tenderness too weak to be tolerated in whatever house they grew up in. And so they learned, as all children learn from an early wound, to make themselves smaller, to hide the parts of themselves that felt too dangerous to reveal. And when they meet you, when they meet someone who never learned that lesson, or who unlearned it through years of difficult, deliberate work, they meet without realizing it, the child they were forced to abandon. Their resentment is not really about you. It is grief, wearing the mask of cruelty, standing in front of the person who reminds them of everything they were never allowed to become. This does not obligate you to fix them. It does not obligate you to stay, but it might, if you let it, soften the sharpest edge of the wound they left in you, not because they deserve your softness, but because you deserve to set down the weight of hatred you have been carrying on their behalf. So let me leave you tonight with this. You were never too much. You were simply early, early to a kind of consciousness that the people around you had not yet reached, early to a wholeness that made them uncomfortable, precisely because they had not yet found their own. Your light was never the problem. It was only ever the mirror, and mirrors are never gentle with the parts of us we have refused to see. Do not dim yourself to keep others comfortable in their unconsciousness. Do not mistake their resentment for evidence of your flaw. And do not, under any circumstance, spend one more year of this one precious, unrepeatable life apologizing for a depth that the right people, the people who have done their own work, faced their own shadow, made their own uneasy peace with the darker rooms of their own minds, will one day recognize not as a threat, but as a home. Go into the world exactly as feeling as you were made to be. Let your compassion remain fierce, but let it also finally become wise. Protect it the way you would protect anything sacred and rare, because it is sacred and it is rare, and the world, however loudly some corners of it protest, cannot survive without people like you in it. Your light was never meant to make everyone comfortable. It was only ever meant to be true, and that in the end is more than enough.